Elizabeth, one of the things that a lot of researchers have identified as a barrier to implementing sustainable development is governance. I mean, do you have a vision of how we should be structured, how to society?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the big risks with sustainable development as a goal is that environment departments are reconceptualized as being about sustainable development. And that means there's no advocate for the environment anymore. The role of government as a whole is sustainable development. The role of environment departments has to be the voice at the cabinet table that says, look, the environment's going to hell in a handbasket, or words to that effect, or we need better monitoring, we need better science, we need to make this case. When an environment department sees itself as sort of an economic department to balance interests, and that's not what sustainable development's about either. It's not about balancing or trade-offs. It's about doing things differently so you don't have trade-offs. So the governance issue is pretty central. It's been the #1 problem on the climate change file in this country, has been the absence of leadership and a failure to know who exactly is in charge. So having Natural Resources Canada, which has behaved as a saboteur in the process, slowing down progress, in charge, and with Natural Resources Canada in charge of domestic implementation, and Environment Canada in charge of the science and making the case, with nobody there to put their foot down and say, look, you guys have to deliver on this. That hasn't happened until recently. We had progress in governance on climate change when Prime Minister Martin created an ad hoc cabinet committee that brought together key ministers and forced them to come up with the climate plan. It was no longer the silo of the two departments that couldn't speak to each other. But that's not good enough. And basically, I think sustainable development governance requires that the central goal of the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council at the federal level, or in each province, the Premier's office and all of that bureaucracy at central agencies has to be focused on sustainability. On the climate issue, I'm increasingly drawn to the conclusion, I've tried to think of the parallels in our history of environmental change that come to anything like the kind of change we have to make as a society to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. And I've come to the conclusion that there is no precedent except for the reorganization of societies, the single purpose of societies when they are at war. So the only analog in the history of Canada that I can find is the way the economy reorganized itself through the Second World War. When you look at the history of that period, you realize that Canada as a nation was basically invented in that period. And the way in which we rebuilt our economy to meet a war effort, it's exactly what we have to do on climate change. So that's where, in terms of governance, conceiving of the issue as an environmental issue and having it hived off to one department among many is never going to work, or even two departments. It has to be seen as a central driving, as they say in French, le projet de société. It has to be such a central, fundamental, galvanizing force for a society that a single purpose makes sense. That's the kind of challenge climate change is, which makes it quite different from other environmental issues.